Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, and back with me is our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford. Hi, Larry.
Good day, Joy.
Good day. So this is going to be a quick brief and some questions we have concerning the latest news on the exploding pagers and other communication devices used by Hezbollah, as well as Iranian militia in Syria. Larry, this was a very well orchestrated intel, quite amazing feat what they accomplished here, and very pointed. The big question, I guess, is how did they get the devices?
Joy, there are so many questions, and the problem is you ask one question, it leads to another question. And the rule of thumb is in situations like this is, where did the money come from? Yes. Who generated the money to buy these things, and where did the money come from? How was it processed through what kind of payment systems? Now we have crypto, and we have all these different venues of moving money, but probably the money to buy these things came from Iran. So how did Iran get the money to Hezbollah to buy the devices? Which then leads to Hezbollah has the money. Who decided where they were going to buy the devices? And what kind of vetting process did they have in buying the devices? The whole thing will make a great movie or a great novel, tracking all these questions of why did they buy these particular brand? I mean, it's got a label on them, the initial ones anyways, the pages, from a company in Taiwan that claims it distributed the rights. They didn't manufacture them, to a company in Hungary. And the company in Hungary is a house run by a woman that doesn't appear anywhere, who denies ever having anything to do with it. So how did these devices...
Consulting is what I read, and it's still kind of early to assume things, but it looks like it's a basic shell company.
Yeah, and that leads to a question: how long was she there? How long has the shell company existed? Why did they buy from the shell company in Hungary?
Well, it sounds like from what I was reading, this may not be the first time that they've bought from this company. It looks like money was coming from the Middle East, so I would agree with you that it was probably Iran that bought the pagers. And I'm guessing they would distribute them to Hezbollah and their other Iranian militia, unknowingly that has explosive device in this one.
And how do they get the devices with the corruption of a battery or a chip? It's just another question. And why did Hezbollah decide that they had to buy these particular pages? Why did they decide to go back to electronic devices that are basically 20 or 30 years old? I mean, who uses a pager nowadays? They didn't want to use the iPhones or those type of phones because apparently the Israelis were able to crack the calls, which I don't understand, because we see situations here in America where we have terrorists with their iPhones and the FBI has a heck of a time deciphering. So you mean to tell me they couldn't buy the same kind of software on the market to make it difficult for the Israelis to decrypt them? I just don't understand the decision-making process that Hezbollah did to buy these pages. And how did the Israelis, if it were the Israelis, and it certainly probably was, how did they get into the supply chain to corrupt these devices? And it's now, as we know, 2 or 3 days later, not only the pages, but there was also other electronic devices being exploded all over Lebanon. And it's only, apparently, it's leaders of Hezbollah that are being killed or maimed.
Right, so they pinpointed them, which is very interesting.
Yeah. And I was just reading this morning in the Wall Street Journal where they're talking about it was maybe the batteries that were corrupted. And so where did the batteries come from? How did they get into the supply chain? It just goes on and on, the question. So
a lot of questions, but one thing for sure, it's caused a lot of chaos with Hezbollah and their communication with Iran, I'm sure. So then that brings me to a question. Do you think this would be an opportune time for Israel to militarily strike at Hezbollah in the north?
Well, there's certainly rumbles of it And you know, the United Nations has a resolution that there's a buffer zone in Lebanon where Hezbollah was not supposed to operate. And of course, that was quickly ignored, and no one ever talks about the fact that Hezbollah operates out of southern Lebanon and has sent in, what, 8,000 rockets since October 7 into Israel, and Israel has been forced to evacuate northern part of Israel because of the barrage of these rockets. I don't see any worldwide condemnation of the Hezbollah actions in northern Israel. So I think they might be just setting it up so that they say, we want our citizens to return to northern Israel, and we want some sort of buffer zone in Lebanon. So we'll see what happens. But there's rumbles of the military starting to move.
Yes, and Netanyahu has expressed that he wants the people to be able to return safely to the north. So
yeah,
be interested to see if we see any kind of military campaign moving on here in the next day or two.
I mean, Israel's facing, you know, terrorism from Iranian proxies. We had the Gaza war. We have the Houthis firing missiles into Israel from Yemen, and we have the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and we have the West Bank with the PLO and all these other Islamic terrorist groups. I mean, they get a full plate for a nation of 8 or 9 million to 10 million people. It's remarkable what they've been able to accomplish.
I agree. And actually, you bring another point up of the Houthis. So none of their pagers or any electric equipment that I have heard so far has gone and exploded.
Good point.
So interestingly, we're just pinpointing Hezbollah and that small group in Syria there, from what I heard. So
yeah, but they're all tied into shipments up there. So apparently the Houthis didn't receive the same electronic gear.
No.
And of course, there's another example where too little, too nothing about the fact that a ragtag militia is able to divert the world's shipping away from the Red Sea around the, yes. And the U.S. has just done a couple of pinpricks. It's ridiculous that the civilized world has allowed a bunch of basically pirates to disrupt world shipping. And China in the sidelines is laughing. Even though it is affecting them economically, they don't care.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on that. And that brings us to, so peace through strength strategies here. You hit on the first point that the U.S. should do more, and the international community to the Houthis that are blocking the passage of shipments.
Well, I mean, you would think that Egypt would be up in arms because a significant source of foreign exchange is the Suez Canal, and 90% of the traffic in the Suez Canal has disappeared. That's billions of dollars to the Egyptian economy just gone. You'd think that they'd be kind of upset about it. You'd think the Saudis would look upon this as an issue that maybe they ought to reinvestigate. Sadly, of course, the Saudis were waging a war against the Houthis, and the current administration, American administration, vehemently opposed to it. So their efforts to take down the Houthis, which are basically a rebel group within Aden, there's another government within Aden that's a Sunni group. The Houthis are Shia. The U.S. government forced, well, I wouldn't say forced, but exerted pressure for the Saudis to terminate their efforts in supporting the central government against the Houthis. So we have a situation where, in a way, we're deserving what we get.
And in that matter, they're also pressuring Israel. The U.S. pressures Israel as far as their war is concerned. So do you believe the U.S. should stay out of pressuring them and let Israel handle military strikes the way they see fit?
My feeling on this is sort of like my feeling on energy in America. Drill, baby, drill. And I say we supply Israel as many weapons as they want. And if you want to bring peace, you have to win a war. You just can't just have things dribble on and guerrilla war. So Israelis should have gone into Gaza and done it right at the beginning. But the U.S. is withholding munitions. It's a Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan strategy of failure, where we just do things in a piecemeal, kind of wimpy response. The Israelis have to take care of Hamas because their whole purpose in existence is to eradicate Israel. And I'm not saying they're going to eradicate the philosophy of Islam. There's 1.5 billion of them out there. But they can certainly take care of the military structure within Gaza. And the sooner they get that done, the better off everybody is, including the people who live in Gaza.
Yes, I agree. I think the people living in Gaza are suffering under Hamas as it is. So that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. So
we'll see what happens. I agree with U.S. sending military support to them. Even though they're not admitting to this pager incident, if it was Israel, they obviously have the intel very well under control.
Yeah. And I guess we're jumping around a little bit, but the same thing applies to Ukraine. We're just doing it piecemeal. I was in the Vietnam War, and I just saw this gradual escalation of support and so forth. It doesn't work. Either you do it right, or you don't do it at all. I mean, in Vietnam, for example, we should have been bombing the heck out of the harbor right from the beginning, but they didn't want to antagonize nations whose ships were in Haiphong Harbor. Well, if you tell them to get the heck out of there, then they wouldn't have had a problem with that. But no, we just gradual escalations. B-52s used to fly the same pattern going into North Vietnam to bomb them. And of course, the North Vietnamese set up the missile sites to interdict them on the same path. And getting back to Houthis in Yemen, bombing doesn't do it. I mean, we dropped more bombs in Vietnam than we did on Germany in World War II. Bombing doesn't do it. You've got to have a presence on the ground, one way or another, whether it's your troops or someone else's troops, have to be in the ground to control the tempo. And the U.S. has not addressed that issue in Yemen at all.
No, so we'll have to see what happens as this unfolds here with Israel and with Yemen and the Houthis.
Yeah.
But I think we covered the questions and what's going on now, which really brings up more questions. And even talking on this, I just start to wonder if Hezbollah was the one purchasing the devices and maybe Iran wasn't, if the Houthis didn't get them.
Well, Hezbollah has I guess they have money, but I mean, the real money is coming from Iran to support Hezbollah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Hezbollah has crime syndicates and they have businesses and stuff, taxes. So they have revenue, but the real serious money and certainly the weapons and training is coming from Iran.
From Iran, yes. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Larry, for joining me today to discuss this brief on Hezbollah and the situation unfolding, I guess we could say.
We can make a series on this one because it ain't over yet.
No, there may be something new tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you to our listeners. Please subscribe, share, and comment on our YouTube and Rumble channels. And you can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Substack. Become a member of the American Security Council Foundation for as little as $10 a month, and you will also get a Substack paid subscription. Thank you again, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
Have a good day. And to our listeners, join us again next time for our Peace Through Strength podcast and briefs.